This is TWIS, This Week in Science interview episode recorded on Friday, March 4th, 2022. Why do we love? I'm Dr. Kiki, and today on the show, we will be filling your heads with the science of love. And I would love to invite you to enjoy this episode. Welcome. We are here on this special Friday episode for an interview. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to be discussing the science of love with Dr. Anna Machin, who is an evolutionary anthropologist at the University of Oxford, written the book on why we love. I mean, that's what it's called, Why We Love. And we have a great show ahead. I do hope that you will enjoy the conversation. But as we get into everything, I want to remind you that if you have not yet subscribed to this program as a podcast, This Week in Science is available as a podcast, all places podcasts are found. We stream live weekly on Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Pacific time on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. We are TWIS Science on Twitch, Twitter, and Instagram. All sorts of things to remember. You can find information about the show at our website, twis.org. Okay, so now let's jump into this wonderful interview. Dr. Machin, I would love to welcome you to our Friday interview program. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me on. It's really exciting.
Yeah, I'm absolutely thrilled to get to speak with you. I mean, I wanted to get you in a conversation closer to Valentine's Day, but we're still within a couple of weeks. So I think this will work. What first got you interested in the question of why we love enough that you wanted to study it? Because, I mean, as humans, we're all like, why do we love?
Yeah, it kind of began a really long time ago, long before I studied alive humans. So I did my PhD on the evolution of social and sexual behavior in the Middle Pleistocene. And the Middle Pleistocene, for those of you who aren't up on that particular period, is between about 1.8 million years ago and 500 million years ago. But during that period, lots of really exciting things in our social behavior began. We saw the formation of families. We saw the evolution of fatherhood. We saw the evolution of lots of cooperation, and it was a really exciting time. And so I did my PhD on that, and then I basically turned up on the doorstep of Professor Robin Dunbar at Oxford University. I taught his son at university, and I turned up on his doorstep, and I just went, I really want to work with you, and I'm basically not going anywhere. So he tolerated me, and I kind of took up a place in his research group. We studied sort of everything to do with the evolution and the neuroscience of social behavior. So I had colleagues who were doing massive network-sized global, social networks. But my job was to do dyadic relationships. So the really close relationships we have. And that's basically love. And I started where everybody starts when they do love, with romantic love. But as an anthropologist, I think my role is to really understand the totality of a trait or a behavior in humans. And it quickly became apparent in just talking to my subjects that we experience love in so many different ways. And so my role was to really look at that full spectrum, to understand what happens in our bodies and in our brains when we fall in love, and to just get as big an understanding of the complexity of love as we possibly could. So explanations at every level of explanation. And I think that's doing the job properly as an anthropologist, is to get that totality of what's going on.
Right. And at the beginning of your book, the preface, you say, I'm not going to give you a simple answer to why we love. And is that pretty much it? Why is there no simple answer? Is it just so big?
It's so big. And the more you study it, the bigger it kind of gets. I mean, you can start to narrow it down to factors. But yeah, what I think is amazing about love, and I say it in the book, is I find it awe-inspiring. I find it awe-inspiring because it literally infiltrates every fiber of your being. So every mechanism in your body is involved in love. And then if you think about your daily life, it infiltrates all your daily life, your daily decisions, the interactions you have with other people. So it's a really awe-inspiring thing. And I think if we reduce it to one thing or two things, and we try and find a formulae, we're not doing it justice. So actually the book is about explaining love in lots of different ways, and if you put them all together, hopefully you get the 360. Right. So there isn't one answer to the question. And that's what we have to address. And I think sometimes people are disappointed, particularly when I do public talks and I think they turn up thinking, right, science is going to give me the answer. And I'm going to go out here and I'm going to have really successful relationships. And certainly we can tell you lots of wonderful things that are going to help you and really explain how you're feeling or what's going on in your body. But I'm not going to give you a formula at the end saying if you do A plus B divided by C, to the power of whatever, everything's going to be fine, because it doesn't work like that.
So I'm trained as a neuroscientist, and I also trained my undergraduate years as a conservation biologist. And so I am very science oriented, but I come at it from that reductionist perspective. When I think of love, there's the human side, the poet, the artist, creative side that I can appreciate as a human. But when I come at it, I think about it very, very essentially as, okay, we've got molecules and electrical signals in the brain and the body, and that is how we love.
Yeah.
So can you help me and the audience kind of make that leap from how we love to the why we love?
Well, yeah, I mean, the book is sort of like the how, why, what, where, all those sorts of things. I think obviously the biological side of it, the neuroscientific side of it, is one of the really key important elements. It certainly is. But how somebody experiences love and why they fall in love with a particular person isn't just about that biological dimension. So you can reduce love down to two dimensions: the biological and the social. And the biological side we explain by looking at neuroscience, we explain by looking at genetics, psychology, pharmacology, all these sorts of things. And the book certainly does that. But there's also all those other things that come into why you fall in love. So when you fall in love with somebody, obviously all this wonderful stuff is happening in your brain, your physiology, everything's keying in, your senses. But also, because we experience love at a very conscious level, also things come into your mind like, what will my family think? What will my friends think? What's my culture say about this? What does my religion say about this? What do my politics say about this? What are the laws around this? So when you decide who to love and how you're going to love and why you're going to love, you're not just a biological automaton doing all that. You are bringing in all this other stuff, which is also going to decide, am I going to be in love with this person? And I think because I'm an anthropologist and therefore I'm a scientific end of anthropology, but we are taught very much that we have to understand the total human and not just part of the human. And so I think that's the direction I come at it from. So yeah, my research work is neuroscientific, it's genetic mainly, but I also spend a lot of time talking to my participants, just talking about who they love, what's their most powerful love, what do they think love is, all these sorts of things. And I think you only get the full experience when you get that side of it as well. I think it's my training to do it that way, I think.
What have been some of the most, I guess, insightful comments or interesting comments that have come out of interviews with your subjects that have led you to think about things in a slightly different way?
I suppose there's several things that really, from talking to people, there are two things that really are amazing. It's first of all, how many definitions of love there are. So if you say to someone, what is love? You get so many different definitions. Some people will take down that reductionist thing and they'll go, it's just some neurochemicals in your brain. And they will go down that route. But then you will get people who could write your whole essay on it, or people who will just give you one word. So one person just said to me, friendship. Or one person said to me, understanding, or other people who will go on and on and on. So first of all, that really teaches you a lot about love, because ultimately how I love and how you love are going to be different. And I will never experience love like you experience love. And as a scientist, I will never get to that absolute core of you. I will be able to tell you lots of things about yourself, about let's look at your genotype as it relates to love, and let's see what happens in your brain. What are your neurochemical levels and all this sort of thing. But there's a bit of your love I will never be able to touch. And I think that bit is interesting. I think the other things is just the sheer breadth of love that people can experience, and in so many different ways, and how powerful it is. And some of it's quite challenging for what they see as their most powerful love. So I spoke to nuns for the book, and that's looking at religious love, and this is the most amazing body of neuroscience of religion. It's really interesting. But I was talking to them about their experience and trying to understand their relationships. And I was speaking one nun. Obviously we're used to nuns not having had romantic relationships and not having had children. And in fact, I spoke to one nun who had, quite rarely, before she'd become a nun. Right. And I remember saying to her, okay, and I always ask all my interviews, what is the most powerful love you've experienced? And you get lots of different answers. and as an anthropologist, you have the poker face and you go, okay, that's great, thank you very much. But she said, so I said, what's your most powerful love? And I was expecting her, like a lot of people, to say my children, my grandchildren, I don't know, my best friend. And she just went, God. And for me, that was quite challenging because I am a mum and it's a very powerful love. And I was just like, oh my God, you're putting God above all the others. And that's quite challenging. So people would get you to look at love in a really different way. Same like I spoke to polyamorists, I spoke to aromantics, and they all made me look at love in a different way. And I think that's the power of talking to people about their love, as well as, getting them to spit in tubes and looking at their genes.
Yeah. Your comment about the nun is fascinating. My mother was Christian Scientist, and at one point she started repeating the phrase very often, God is love. And so that was her powerful phrase. It was, not a question of what is God and that relationship. It was, she wasn't having a relationship with this spiritual religious entity. It was love and this much larger thing. And so that in itself, I as growing up with that, I think what you've said about the nun's love of God being so powerful is so fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as you said, being able to talk with all these different people about all these different kinds of love, do they all impact us the same way? So the love of a partner, the love in a polyamorous relationship, the love of a friend, the love of a child. These are, we can say to somebody, I love you, but I'm not in love with you.
Yeah, well, there are different sorts. I mean, it's how you personally define love. So that thing of I love you, but I'm not in love with you, what that tends to reflect quite a lot is the really intense, lustful, passionate bit of love, which is particularly there at the beginning, does fade. And then you get to the sort of companionate level of love, which is underpinned by slightly different neurochemistry. And that is a very different feeling. So that's kind of the I love you, but I'm not every single day hungering for your love. I'm not, like you feel for hungry for food or thirsty for water. I'm not yearning for your love. And that's generally that's that phase where you've gone out of that lustful, passionate bit, which I actually don't define as love in my work. That's a very different thing, into sort of companionate love. And in terms of whether there are differences in the different sorts of love, they're all underpinned by the same neurochemistry at different levels of intensity. Obviously, the brain activations are different because they have different components to them. But in terms of, if we look at it in the evolutionary phase of what are the benefits of love, why did love evolve? The benefits of being in these relationships and having them underpinned by love are the same. We know today, even though people, I mean, the very simple question to the answer, why we love, answer to the question, sorry, why we love is survival. That's why we love. Love at its most basic level, and this is a nice, hard scientific answer, love is biological bribery. Love is what evolution came up with to make sure we cooperate with people, because humans are unbelievably cooperative. We have to be cooperative to achieve so much, to raise our children, to do all the learning we need to learn, to just function in this incredibly complex world, particularly as we keep on innovating things, to subsist. And we need to do this for our survival. If we don't do those things, then our children aren't raised, we don't eat, all these sorts of things. Trouble is, as we all know, cooperating with people is really, really hard. It's stressful. It can, in fact, threaten your survival anyway, particularly if you're eschewing all your needs for somebody else's. So, evolution needs us to do this cooperation, but sometimes it's really hard. And so we get rewarded and motivated by this wonderful flood of neurochemistry. And that is the sensation of love, essentially. Now, lust at the beginning is underpinned by a slightly different balance of those neurochemicals. And then we go into love later on. But so ultimately, the benefits of love are the same. It is your survival. And even today, people say, yeah, but it can't be about survival. I see in the environment in which we evolved that, we probably needed to cooperate to, find water sources, hunt for food, learn how to snap stone tools, all these sorts of things. But really today, I don't think so. But actually, this is the most amazing body of work linking love and having healthy relationships and having functioning relationships with other people and your mental and physical health. And it's very, very powerful. To the extent that, and I agree with him, My boss, Robin Dunbar, has argued that love and the nature of the relationships you have is the biggest factor in your health, your longevity, and your life satisfaction above everything else. If you do not have functioning relationships in your life, regardless of what basis they are, regardless of what context they are, whether they be with friends or family or lovers or whoever it might be, then that is to your detriment, quite severely to your detriment. So, yeah, ultimately, they all have the same benefit. The questions we have going forward into the lesser areas that have been studied is, yes, so does religious love have exactly the same benefit, where you're interacting with someone who doesn't manifest in physical form? Does love for going forward, there's a whole dynamic of trying to develop social robots. If we built friend relationships with robots, would we have the same benefit? And that's kind of a question, and we have to look into that. But when we look at the standard human relationships, yes, they all have the same benefits, really.
Yeah, and there is research suggesting that people who with spiritual religious beliefs, that they have healthier mental states more
absolutely
often.
yeah, we need more evidence on that, but certainly that's where it seems to be pointing. And it's not just because they get a community,
right?
Because some people, it's like you get that church community. Well, there we go. But actually, there is something about the relationship with the higher being that gives you a benefit. Yeah.
And then you have to get into, well, is it correlation? Is it causation?
Exactly. How do you tease that out? And it's, exactly. And it gets very complicated. But that's kind of where we're at with that kind of work is what's going on there. And is that a real effect?
Along the lines of these relationships, in the book, you do talk about the public versus the private aspects of love. So like your personal, private love versus what happens in our culture and society. And I was intrigued by some of the examples of different cultural practices. And what's one of your favorite cultural rituals that you've come across related to love?
Related to love, what I find amazing is there's one particular Pakistani group that they have really interesting rules about the love for your child, which again I find quite challenging, because in the West we're all into you shower your child with love and it's attachment parenting and all this sort of thing, and you praise your child, and they have the complete opposite. That to show true love for your child is to restrain yourself from showing that love. So you can shower the kid next door with love, but you do not do that to your child, because if you do that, you bring the threat of the evil eye upon them. And I just find that really interesting. So as a mother, you actually have to fight your instinct, which your instinct is generally to bundle your child up and comfort them and sing their praises from the rooftops and do all those sorts of things. That's not what you do. And that shows the huge power of culture to work against what we are actually evolved to do. And I think it's really, really interesting how strong it's like, the cultural ideas about, monogamy. And that's why some people find polyamory so threatening, because actually it goes against our societal rules about how we should love. It's not actually based on any particular scientific evidence, but it's based on the idea that, we all pair up and that's what you do.
Yeah. The aspects of this, how it all evolved, if we come from our tribal beginnings or the small groups, it probably, aside from coupling, there were not those just the pairing up. There was probably much more polyamorous or at least less monogamous relationships and much more social connection, and maybe even more group raising of children. And so and the question is, how did we split off into all these different cultural identities with these different
Exactly. I mean, and it's really interesting. I mean, monogamy evolved in terms of what, socially imposed monogamy and religiously imposed monogamy, very much as a form of social control. That's what it's about. It's much easier if we know that everyone's going to pair up with one other person, so we can keep control of that. We know if you just let everyone just do whatever they want, then we have chaos and we can't cope with chaos. So we will have these rules where, you can only marry one person at a time, and God says you can only marry these sorts of people. And then that's nice and neat and everybody knows the rules. And that's a power thing. That's maintaining power over society. When in fact, as you say, in terms of how we evolved, we might have had a form of serial monogamy, particularly when we just had tiny babies, human babies, as we all know, are born far too early. They need to have been in there a lot longer. So they're very, very dependent. And maybe, and it's why human fatherhood evolved, but maybe for a short period of time, a pair of parents might stick together for a bit at that really tricky time to invest and make sure the kids survived. But after that, it's kind of like a free-for-all, and certainly we have definitely evolved to raise our children as a community, not as two people. Definitely. And even in those worlds where we have this idea of the nuclear family, if you think of the number of people who have an input into your child's life, even if they're professionals, teachers, doctors, that's all cooperating. That's all a cooperative raising of your child.
I wonder what, if we were to follow the biological aspects of love and let that dictate our culture, how much different would our cultures look?
That's really interesting. I think they would. That's a brilliant. No one's ever asked me that before, and that's a brilliant question. I think if we were less restrained, I think there would be much more freedom to choose and to move quite fluidly between different relationship types. We have these rules about how you should be and monogamy or whatever. But I think maybe if we just followed what our instincts were and I'm attracted to this person, so today I'm having a relationship with this person, whatever their sexuality, whatever their gender, that's what I'm going with. Tomorrow I'm going to go and do this. Or, for those people who can cope with jealousy to the extent that they are very happy to be in polyamorous relationships, I think you would see much more open behavior along those lines. Yeah, and I think you would see the removal of those structures, and you would see people following their instincts much, much more. So it would be a much more fluid thing, I think, if we've just followed our biology. Some of our biology, for some people isn't helpful. Right. So, but in the long run, I think it would be a much more fluid and open way of being, rather than people restraining themselves and working against some of their biology.
Right. And there would be a reduction probably in that societal control, cultural control, top down.
Yes, which would scare the people in power. They would not like that. That would not be good.
As you mentioned also the positive mental health aspects of relationships, all the relationships that we have, and we're coming into a lull point, a dwell point in the COVID-19 pandemic, where masks are starting to come off. People are coming together again and socializing a lot more than they have over the last couple of years here in the United States. People are going back to the offices, and things are going back to, I'm not going to say going back to normal. They're going.
Yeah.
So what have you seen over the last couple of years in terms of relationships and how they have affected love and mental health, how the pandemic affected that?
I think we all know the pandemic was not positive for our mental health. And I think alongside the fear and, listening to a lot of negative news, the big thing that fed into that was the inability to have meaningful contact with those you love and meaningful contact with other people. Humans have evolved to be with each other in person. We don't understand this screen, this virtual relationship thing. Our brains have not evolved to deal with this. So we need to be in the room, and we need to, the neurochemistry that's released when you interact with somebody is based upon touch. It's based upon laughter. It's based upon eye gaze. It's based upon all these sorts of things. And that's about being in the room with somebody. And I think one of the most powerful things that showed to me how important love was the concept of biobehavioral synchrony. And biobehavioral synchrony is something you observe when two people are interacting. And we all know that if two people are close and they interact, they kind of mirror each other's behavior. And we kind of know that. But if you look inside their bodies, their physiology comes into synchrony as well. So it started from different baselines, but you get, a synchrony in heart rate and blood pressure and body temperature. And then if you look in the brain, we get synchrony in neurochemical release and in brain activation. And so every single mechanism in your body is coming together in one sense, kind of making two people one person. And I think that is very powerful. And that underpins the benefits of love. Now, if you are separate, you do not get that. You do not get that amazing coming together of two people. And that's, people would often say, I viscerally, or I feel pain that I'm not holding my loved ones. I feel pain that I'm not with them. I can feel it as a physical sensation. And that is why, is because you're not getting the biobehavioral synchrony, you're not getting the positive neurochemistry, you're not getting the mental and physical benefits. And that is, I think, why it hurts so much. And I think in one sense, I write in the preface to the book that if any positive thing has come out of COVID, I think maybe it's a realization, which I really hope we hold on to, of the importance of being with each other and of those you love and the support you get from them, and acknowledging that, because that's what we were feeling. We were feeling that absolute absence of this structure that underpins your life. It wasn't there anymore. So yeah, from a COVID point of view, it's been very interesting for those of us who study sort of social behavior.
Well, I'm sure there are going to be research papers coming out for the next decade.
Yeah. Exactly. So many people to study.
You mentioned earlier different questions that are still going, still having questions, more questions about love, even after studying it for years and writing this book. One that's interesting to me, and I don't know if you have any insight into this as also having been a primatologist, but the question of, do other animals feel love? If it is for survival of social animals, especially, would we expect to see the artifacts of love or things similar to love appear in animals that would give us an idea that, yes, they do love as well?
Yeah, I very strongly believe animals love as well. I think the problem we have is we kind of hold animals to a higher level of proof than we do humans. So if I said to you, do you love that person over there? And you said, yes, I just believe you. Okay, you love that person over there. We don't believe that with an animal. So we put these tests in place for animals. So, do they have the neurochemistry that we have that underpins it? Do they exhibit attachment? Do they have empathy? And what kind of empathy? Are we just talking like, emotional empathy or emotional contagion? Are we talking full cognitive empathy? Do they have relationships beyond the reproductive? So do they have friends, for example? Do they experience grief, which is obviously the absence of love? So we set all these little hurdles up and we go, right, you've got to jump over all these hurdles. And there's a lot of animals that jump over those hurdles. So, particularly if you look at elephants, you look at, the higher elephants, dolphins, the apes, monkeys, dogs, meet some of them. So there are a lot of animals that get over them, but even then you will get some people
who's crawling on the bookshelf.
Okay,
next to
cats. We're working on cats, and I'm sure they do. But so we get them to go over all the hurdles, and then someone will go, yes, but.
Yep.
And that's the problem, is that we said. So I very strongly believe, and there was a wonderful neuroscientist who you might know called Jaak Panksepp, and he was an effective neuroscientist, and he studied relationships and social behavior in a lot of mammals. And what he said was, love is kind of like the cake, and lots of animals have the cake. But what we've done with human love is we've kind of decorated it on the top with all this other stuff, which is wonderful and gorgeous, but not necessary to experience love. So we will say, they don't abstract about their love. And do they love in the absence of the other person? And do they love in this? And it's like, yeah, but you don't need to do all that to experience love. We've just got all that because we have this massive brain and obviously had a lot of time on our hands. But actually, it's the cake that matters. And there are a lot of animals who have the cake, I think.
In this case, the cake is not a lie. The cake is love.
Yes, absolutely.
I would love to continue talking with you about this, but we are at our time and I don't want to keep you late on a Friday evening where you are. So can we finish up with just a couple of very brief questions? Your book, Why We Love, what do you hope that people can take from it into their own lives?
I hope that they re-engage with all the different types of love in their lives. We have a bit of a thing in the West of like privileging romantic love, for example. I want you to go into your life and really look at it and appreciate it and see where it all is, because actually it benefits you all. There is no hierarchy of love. They are all valuable.
And is there anything that we didn't touch on that you want to comment on before we go?
I think just what's really interesting also, I think, is the science behind the individuality of love. So in the book, we go through a lot of the genetics that explain why people love differently. And I think that's also a really fascinating area. We have universals, but there are also many things that make us different. And I try in the book and really bring that out as to why we all love in a different way.
Why We Love is available all over the world right now.
Yeah, it is. It's published in America, so that's the British cover. There is an American cover which is very pretty, and yeah, so it's published in America as well.
And yes, it's available for order, for buying in bookstores if you go to bookstores, which people are doing more and more often these days.
Yep.
And I've really enjoyed getting to speak with you about this and reading through your book. It's so full of interesting stories and interesting science that I've quite enjoyed. So thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
And everyone out there, thank you for joining me for this interview. I do hope that you will join us again for another Friday fun interview, because more and more are getting scheduled. This Week in Science does air, like I said, weekly, 8 p.m. Pacific time on Wednesday nights on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. And if you have learned anything from this show, remember, it's all in your head.